Billionaire catches his girlfriend humiliating the black maid. Her next move left everyone speechless. The sound of cruel laughter echoing through his marble foyer stopped Adrian stark dead in his tracks. For 15 years, his penthouse had been a sanctuary of silence and respect. Until today. The laughter wasn't joyful. It was the kind that carved wounds into souls, sharp and deliberate as a blade. Adrian's hand froze on his briefcase handle as he stood in the shadow of his own front door, 3 hours earlier than expected from his business trip to Singapore. Clean it again, Ruby. And this time, maybe you'll actually get it right. Victoria Cross's voice dripped with venom that Adrian had never heard before. His girlfriend of 2 years, the woman he'd been considering proposing to, sounded like a stranger. The marble floor of the foyer amplified every word, bouncing the cruelty off the walls of what had once felt like home. I cleaned it twice already, Miss Victoria. The floor is spotless. Ruby Williams's voice trembled, but there was something else there, a dignity that even humiliation couldn't strip away. Adrian pressed himself against the wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. Ruby had been with his family for 12 years. She'd held his hand when his mother died. She'd worked 16-hour days without complaint, sending every penny she could spare to her 3 children who lived with her sister across town. She was family, spotless. Victoria's voice rose to a screech. Look at this scuff mark right here. Are you blind? Or just stupid? The sound that followed made Adrian's blood turn to ice. The unmistakable crash of something heavy hitting the floor, followed by Ruby's sharp intake of breath. Oops. Victoria's fake sympathy was worse than her anger. Looks like you'll need to clean that up too. Unless you're too old and clumsy to handle a simple mop bucket. Hey, beautiful souls, wherever you're watching this from around the world, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having an amazing day. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button, because today's story is going to take us on an emotional journey that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about loyalty and love. Adrian's designer shoes should have clicked against the marble, but years of walking these halls had taught him every silent step. He moved like a ghost through his own home, each footfall carefully placed as he approached the grand living room where the voices grew clearer. The scene that unfolded before him was a nightmare painted in broad daylight. Ruby knelt on the pristine white marble, her uniform soaked from the overturned mop bucket. Dirty water spread across the floor she just cleaned, mixing with what looked like deliberately spilled coffee. Her dark hands shook as she tried to gather the scattered cleaning supplies, her dignity intact despite the degradation surrounding her. Victoria stood above her like a predator savoring its prey, her designer heels inches from Ruby's fingers. The woman Adrian thought he loved wore a smile that would have made devils weep, cold, calculating, and drunk on power. You know what I think, Ruby? Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than her screaming. I think you're getting too comfortable here. Too familiar with Adrian. Ruby's hand stilled on the mop handle. I don't understand, Miss Victoria. Oh, I think you do. Victoria circled her like a shark. The way you look at him. The way you act like you belong in this family. You're the help, Ruby. Nothing more than a servant who should know her place. Adrian's vision blurred with rage, but before he could step forward, something in Ruby's posture changed. She slowly, deliberately, rose to her feet. Water dripped from her uniform, but her spine was straight as steel. My place, Ruby repeated, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of years. My place. Victoria stepped back, perhaps sensing the shift in the air, the way prey animals can smell an approaching storm. For 12 years, Ruby continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. I have cleaned your messes, cooked your meals, and held this family together while asking for nothing but respect. I raised my children on the scraps of time you left me, working 7 days a week so they could eat while you spent more on a single dinner than I make in a month. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the city noise from 30 floors below seemed to pause. But you want to know what my real place is, Miss Victoria? Ruby's eyes, which had held back tears just moments before, now blazed with a fire that could melt steel. My place is standing right here, telling you exactly what I've discovered about your real plans for this household. Victoria's face went white as fresh paint. Ruby, you don't know what you're I know about the papers in your room. Ruby's voice cut through Victoria's protests like a sword through silk. The ones hidden in your jewelry box. The ones with the real estate agent's number and the plans to sell this penthouse the moment you get Adrian to marry you. Adrian's briefcase slipped from his numb fingers and hit the floor with a sound like thunder. Victoria spun around, her face cycling through emotions faster than a broken traffic light. Shock, fear, anger, and finally, something that looked almost like relief. Adrian, she breathed, but her voice held no warmth, no surprise, no love. Ruby stood frozen, her revelation hanging in the air between them like a blade ready to fall. And Adrian Stark, billionaire, philanthropist, and fool in love, felt his entire world shift beneath his feet as he realized that everything he thought he knew about the two most important women in his life had just been shattered by the sound of truth. The question that would haunt him for the rest of his days formed in his mind as he stared at the woman he'd almost married. Who was Victoria Cross, really? And how long had she been planning to destroy everything he held dear? The briefcase hitting the marble floor echoed through Adrian's memory like the sound of his father's casket being lowered into the ground. Final, devastating, and impossible to take back. Adrian, darling, you're home early. Victoria's voice had transformed again, sliding back into the honey-sweet tone that had once made his heart race. But now it sounded like poison wrapped in silk. Ruby was just having a little accident with the cleaning supplies. Adrian's eyes moved from Victoria's perfectly composed face to Ruby, who stood like a statue carved from dignity and pain. Dirty water still dripped from her uniform, but her chin remained lifted, her dark eyes holding secrets that suddenly felt more valuable than all the gold in his investment portfolio. Ruby, he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the city's distant hum. Are you all right? The simple question seemed to unlock something in her. Her shoulders trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of 12 years of held-back truths finally demanding to be spoken. Adrian Stark had built an empire worth $3 billion, but standing in his living room, he felt as powerless as the day his mother died in this very house. Ruby had been there then, too, 24 years old, barely older than a girl herself, holding his 13-year-old hand while the paramedics confirmed what they all already knew. Your mama loved you more than her own heartbeat, Ruby had whispered that night, her voice steady while his world crumbled. That love doesn't die just because she's gone. It lives in you now. She'd been his anchor through prep school loneliness, college anxiety, and the crushing weight of inheriting his father's business empire at 25. When other employees saw dollar signs, Ruby saw the scare boy who sometimes forgot to eat when he worked too late. I'm fine, Mr. Adrian, Ruby said now, but her voice carried the same gentle strength it had all those years ago. I was just explaining to Miss Victoria about some things I've discovered. Victoria moved closer to Adrian, her hand reaching for his arm with practiced intimacy. Ruby's been acting very strangely lately. I think the stress of working here might be affecting her judgment. The touch that once set Adrian's pulse racing now felt like ice against his skin. He studied Victoria's face, the face he'd kissed good morning just 3 days ago before leaving for Singapore. High cheekbones that belonged to magazines, green eyes that sparkled with what he'd thought was love, lips that had whispered promises of forever just last week. When did those promises start feeling like threats? Tell me about these papers, Ruby, Adrian said, stepping away from Victoria's reach. The movement was subtle, but in the acoustics of the marble-floored room, it sounded like a door slamming shut. Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers clenched into fists. Adrian, surely you're not going to take the word of the help over your own girlfriend? The help. The words hit Adrian like a physical blow, not because they hurt him, but because of what they revealed about the woman he'd shared his bed with for 2 years. Ruby had never been the help to his family. She was the woman who worked 3 jobs to put her oldest daughter through nursing school. She was the person who donated half her Christmas bonus every year to the children's hospital where his mother had volunteered. She was the keeper of family recipes, the rememberer of birthdays, the silent guardian who had turned a cold mansion into a warm home. Ruby isn't the help, Adrian said, his voice carrying the authority that made CEOs tremble in boardrooms. She's family. The word hung in the air like a challenge thrown down between them. Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath, something that looked like pure hatred directed straight at Ruby. It was gone so quickly Adrian almost thought he'd imagined it, but Ruby had seen it too. Her posture straightened, as if she'd finally identified the predator that had been circling her home. "Family," Victoria repeated, her laugh sharp as breaking glass. "How touching. Though I suppose blood means less than sentiment in some households." The cruelty in her tone made Adrian's chest tighten. When did Victoria become this person? Or had she always been this way, hiding behind designer clothes and charity galas and whispered endearments in the dark? Ruby cleared her throat softly, the sound somehow commanding attention for both of them. "Mr. Adrian, there are things you need to know. Things I should have told you months ago, but She paused, vulnerability flickering across her features. "I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. Afraid I'd lose the only family I have left." Adrian's heart clenched. Ruby's husband had died in a construction accident 8 years ago, leaving her to raise 3 children alone. Her extended family lived in Georgia, too poor to help and too proud to ask for it. This penthouse, this job, these people, they were her entire world. "You could never lose us," Adrian said, meaning every word. "Tell me what you found." Victoria stepped between them, her body language screaming desperation disguised as indignation. "This is ridiculous, Adrian. I won't stand here and be accused by someone who rifles through my personal belongings. I wasn't rifling." Ruby's voice cut through Victoria's protest like a knife through butter. "Your jewelry box fell off the dresser when I was cleaning your room yesterday." The papers scattered everywhere. She met Adrian's eyes, her own blazing with suppressed fury. Real estate listings for penthouses in Miami. Bank account numbers I'd never seen before. And a contract with someone named Harrison Fletcher about transferring property ownership after marriage. Adrian felt the blood drain from his face. Harrison Fletcher was one of the most ruthless real estate developers in the city, the kind of man who bought historic buildings and turned them into soulless shopping centers. "You're planning to sell the penthouse," Adrian said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "It's just an option," Victoria said quickly. "A contingency plan. You know how volatile the real estate market can be." But Ruby wasn't finished. "There are letters too, Mr. Adrian. Letters to your business rivals. Offer to provide them with information about your merger plans, your investment strategies." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt louder than screaming. "She's been selling your secrets, and she's been planning to sell your home." The silence that followed was so complete that Adrian could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Victoria's beautiful face twisted into something Adrian had never seen before, raw, desperate fury mixed with the panic of a cornered animal. "You have no proof of any of this." "I have photos," Ruby said quietly. "I took pictures of everything before I put it back." Adrian stared at the 2 women who had shaped his world for the past 2 years, one who had loved him, and one who had apparently been systematizing his destruction with the precision of a surgeon. And as the weight of betrayal settled over him like a suffocating blanket, one question burned in his mind. How many other secrets was Victoria hiding, and how far was she willing to go to keep them buried? The answer, he suspected, would change everything. What do you think is going to happen when Adrian sees those photos? Drop your predictions in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe because part 3 is going to reveal Victoria's shocking response to being exposed. "Show me the photos." Adrian's voice cut through the tension like a blade, each word measured and deadly calm. In boardrooms, that tone meant someone was about to lose everything. In his living room, it meant the same thing. Victoria laughed, the sound brittle as old bones. "You're really going to humiliate me by looking at stolen pictures taken by the maid?" "Her name is Ruby," Adrian said, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face. "And yes, I am." Ruby pulled her phone from her uniform pocket with hands that trembled only slightly. But before she could unlock it, Victoria lunged forward with the desperation of someone watching their world collapse in real time. "Don't you dare. Stop." Adrian's command froze Victoria mid-step. The authority in his voice could have stopped traffic, and it certainly stopped one desperate woman in designer heels. "Ruby, show me everything." Ruby's fingers moved across her phone screen, and Adrian found himself holding his breath as she turned the device toward him. The first image made his stomach drop through the floor. It was his own letterhead, his own signature, on a document he'd never seen before. A power of attorney form, granting Victoria cross-legal authority over his medical decisions, his business interests, and his estate, effective immediately upon marriage. When did you forge my signature? Adrian's voice was so quiet it was terrifying. Victoria's perfect composure finally cracked. Adrian, you have to understand. I was protecting us. Protecting our future together. Our future. He scrolled to the next photo, and the betrayal hit him like a physical blow. Bank statements showing wire transfers from his private accounts. Accounts only Victoria had access to as his girlfriend, sent to offshore holdings in the Cayman Islands. $300,000. Moved in increments small enough to avoid triggering automatic alerts. You've been stealing from me. It's not stealing when we're going to be married. Victoria's voice rose to a shriek that echoed off the marble walls. Everything you have will be mine anyway. I was just organizing our assets. Ruby stepped closer, her presence steady and warm beside Adrian's growing cold fury. There's more, she said softly. Keep looking. The next photo made Adrian's blood turn to ice water. It was a copy of his mother's death certificate, with notes scrawled in Victoria's handwriting. Verify inheritance laws. Contestable? Check family history for other claimants. You researched whether my mother's death could be contested, Adrian said, the words feeling like gravel in his throat. Victoria's mask finally shattered completely. Your mother left you everything, Adrian. A 30-year-old man who inherited billions while people like me had to fight for every scrap. Do you know what it's like to grow up with nothing? To watch people like you get handed empires while the rest of us crawl. Ruby's sharp intake of breath was audible in the sudden silence. Adrian felt something fundamental shift inside him. Not just anger anymore, but a cold, calculating fury that his business rivals had learned to fear. So this was always about money, he said. Everything is about money. Victoria's beautiful facade was gone, replaced by something raw and desperate. Love doesn't pay bills, Adrian. Love doesn't buy security. You were an investment, and I was secure in my returns. The casual cruelty of it hit Adrian like a sledgehammer. 2 years of shared meals, whispered conversations, intimate moments, all of it calculated, measured, and monetized by a woman he'd trusted with his heart. But Ruby wasn't finished. She scrolled to another photo, and this one made Adrian's hands clench in a fist. It was a handwritten letter addressed to someone named Vincent Kane, a name Adrian recognized from the financial newspapers. Kane was a corporate raider, the kind of vulture who bought struggling companies and stripped them for parts. Dear Vincent, the letter began in Victoria's flowing script. Adrian's merger with Hartwell Industries is proceeding as planned. He expects to finalize by month's end. The inside information we discussed should give you ample opportunity to position your holdings accordingly. As discussed, my payment should reflect the value of this intelligence. You sold information about the Hartwell merger, Adrian said, his voice deadly quiet. That merger represents 600 jobs, families who depend on those positions. Victoria shrugged, the gesture obscene in its casualness. Business is business. But it was the final photo that broke something irreparable inside Adrian's chest. A printed email exchange between Victoria and someone identified only as M. Cross, presumably a relative. The subject line read, Timeline update, Stark acquisition. Victoria, almost ready for the final phase. The maid is becoming a problem. She's too close to Adrian, sees too much. Need to eliminate her position before the wedding. M. Cross. Accident? Make it look natural. Victoria, already working on it. Found out she has a heart condition she's hiding. One good shock should do it. The phone slipped from Adrian's numb fingers and clattered to the marble floor. Ruby stepped back, her face pale as moonlight. She knows about my heart. Victoria's smile was pure poison. Did you really think I wouldn't do background checks on everyone in this household? Your medical records are quite interesting, Ruby. All those emergency room visits you've been hiding. All those prescriptions you can't afford to fill regularly. Adrian felt something primal and protective surge through him. The same instinct that had driven him to stand up to bullies in prep school, magnified by the fury of a man watching someone threaten his family. You were planning to hurt her, he said. I was planning to solve a problem, Victoria corrected. Ruby's become too comfortable here, too familiar with you. She needed to be reminded of her place, permanently. Ruby's hand went to her chest, pressing against her heart as if trying to hold it together through sheer will. The gesture broke Adrian's heart and ignited his rage in equal measure. "Get out." The words came from somewhere deep and primal. "Get out of my house. Now." Victoria laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Your house. Check the lease agreement, darling. I've been living here for 2 years. Under tenant laws, you can't just throw me out. And when the police see how the maid has been stealing from you, planting evidence, trying to turn you against your devoted girlfriend." She pulled out her own phone, fingers flying across the screen. "I wonder how they'll view her little photography session." The threat hung in the air like a blade above Ruby's head. Adrian realized with crystalline clarity that this moment would define everything that came after. Victoria wasn't just leaving quietly. She was going to war, and Ruby, loyal, honest, vulnerable Ruby, was her primary target. As sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer with every passing second, Adrian made a choice that would change 3 lives forever. He stepped between Victoria and Ruby, his decision made. But the question that would haunt him was this: would his choice to protect Ruby cost her everything she'd worked to build, or would it finally give her the justice she'd been denied for far too long? The sirens are getting closer, and I have a feeling Victoria's next move is going to shock us all. What do you think happens when the police arrive? Let me know in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed because part 4 is going to take this story to places you never expected. The sirens stopped outside Adrian's building, replaced by the sharp crackle of police radios and the heavy footsteps of officers entering the marble lobby 30 floors below. Victoria straightened her shoulders and smoothed her hair, transforming herself back into the picture of elegance and victimhood with terrifying efficiency. "Remember, Adrian," she said, her voice honey-sweet again, "I'm the girlfriend who discovered your trusted mate stealing from you. Ruby's the one with the criminal history you never bother to check." Ruby's face went white as fresh snow. "Criminal history? Oh, didn't Adrian know?" Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. "About your shoplifting arrest when you were 17? About the check that bounced when your husband was dying and you couldn't afford his medication? The system keeps wonderful records, Ruby, especially for people like you." Adrian felt something fierce and protective roar to life in his chest. "Those aren't crimes, Victoria. Those are a teenager making a mistake and a woman trying to save her husband's life." "The law doesn't see it that way," Victoria replied, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "And neither will the police when they see a woman with a record who had access to your private papers, your computer, your financial information." The elevator dinged, announcing the arrival of Adrian's worst nightmare. "Ruby," Adrian said urgently, turning to face her. For the first time in 12 years, he really looked at her. Not as the woman who cleaned his house or cooked his meals, but as the person who had been the one constant in his adult life. Her dark eyes held intelligence, strength, and a kindness that money couldn't buy. Her hands, now trembling slightly, had held him when his mother died, had made him soup when he was sick, had touched his shoulder in comfort more times than he could count. When did those touches start meaning more than comfort? "I need you to trust me," he said, moving closer to her. Close enough to smell the lavender soap she always used, close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes that he'd somehow never noticed before. "Mr. Adrian," Ruby whispered, and something in the way she said his name made his chest tighten. "I can't lose this job. My children. Maria's in her last year of nursing school, and Tony needs surgery for his leg, and little Jasmine." Her voice broke. "This job is everything to me." Adrian reached out without thinking, his fingers brushing hers. The contact sent electricity up his arm, not the calculated passion he'd felt with Victoria, but something real and warm and terrifying in its honesty. "You're not going to lose anything," he promised, meaning every word. "I won't let that happen." Ruby stared at their joined hands, confusion and something else, something that looked dangerously like hope, flickering across her features. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk everything for someone like me?" The question hit Adrian like a physical blow. Someone like her. Ruby Williams had more integrity in her little finger than most people Adrian knew had in their entire bodies. She'd raised 3 children while working multiple jobs, had never missed a day of work even when she was sick, and had treated his house like her own sacred trust for 12 years. Because, Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion he didn't fully understand, someone like you is exactly what someone like me needs. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and terror in equal measure. Victoria watched the exchange with eyes like chips of green ice. How touching, she said acidly. The billionaire and the maid. Like something out of fairy tale. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, accompanied by the jingle of handcuffs and the weight of authority approaching. Mr. Stark, a voice called through the door, followed by 3 sharp knocks. NYPD. We received a report of theft and harassment. Victoria's smile was triumphant. Showtime. Adrian squeezed Ruby's hand once, then stepped toward the door, his mind racing. Victoria had orchestrated this perfectly. She had 2 years of intimate knowledge about his habits, his routines, his blind spots. She knew he traveled frequently, knew Ruby had access to every room in the penthouse, knew exactly how to spin a story that would destroy an innocent woman's life. But Victoria had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how far Adrian Stark would go to protect the people he loved. The realization hit him like lightning. He loved Ruby. Not the way he'd thought he loved Victoria, with passion built on illusion and shared interests. This was deeper, quieter, stronger. It was love built on respect, on shared history, on the knowledge that Ruby Williams had been the best part of his life for 12 years, and he'd been too blind to see it. Adrian opened the door to find 2 officers standing in the hallway, a middle-aged black woman with sergeant stripes, and a younger white man with the intense eyes of someone who'd seen too much too young. Sergeant Martinez. The woman introduced herself, her gaze taking in the scene with professional assessment. This is Officer Thompson. We understand there's been a domestic dispute involving theft. Victoria stepped forward immediately, tears beginning to flow with Oscar-worthy precision. Officers, thank God you're here. I discovered our maid going through my personal belongings, and when I confronted her, she became violent and threatening. She's been stealing from my boyfriend's accounts for months. Ruby stood frozen, her dignity wrapped around her like armor, but Adrian could see the fear in her eyes. Fear of losing her job, her home, her children's future. Fear of a system that had never been designed to protect women like her. Sergeant Martinez looked between the 3 of them, her experienced eyes missing nothing. The overturned mop bucket, Ruby's soaked uniform, Victoria's perfect makeup and dry clothing. Ma'am, she said to Ruby, is this true? Have you been taking items that don't belong to you? Ruby lifted her chin, meeting the officer's gaze directly. No, ma'am. I've never stolen anything in my life. She's lying, Victoria said immediately. She has a criminal record. Theft, fraud. Officer Martinez. Adrian interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being heard. Before we go any further, I think you should know that I'm the owner of this penthouse, and I haven't reported any theft because there hasn't been any. The sergeant's eyebrows rose slightly. Sir, the complaint we received specifically mentioned. The complaint was filed by someone who doesn't live here, Adrian continued, his voice steady as steel. Someone who was asked to leave my home after I discovered she'd been embezzling from my accounts and threatening my staff. Victoria's perfect composure cracked. That's not. He doesn't know what he's saying. She's manipulated him, turned him against me. Ma'am, Officer Thompson interrupted. You need calm down. But Victoria was spiraling, the careful control she'd maintained for 2 years finally shattering under the weight of her exposed lies. You don't understand. She's the criminal here. She's the one who. Who what? Ruby's voice cut through Victoria's hysteria like a sword through silk. She stepped forward, no longer trembling, no longer afraid. Who worked 16-hour days to keep this house running? Who sacrificed time with her own children to take care of yours? Who never asked for anything but respect and a fair wage? The room fell silent except for the hum of the city 30 floors below. Ruby turned to Sergeant Martinez, her voice steady and strong. Officer, I have photographs on my phone of documents I found in Miss Cross's room. Documents showing she's been stealing from Mr. Stark and planning to harm me. I took those pictures to protect myself because I was afraid of exactly this, being blamed for her crimes. Adrian felt pride swell in his chest as he watched Ruby stand up for herself with the quiet courage of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. But Victoria wasn't finished. As Officer Thompson moved to examine Ruby's phone, Victoria pulled out her own device with shaking hands. "You want to see photographs?" she screamed. "I have photographs too. Of her going through my things. Of her stealing." The phone slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered to the marble floor. The screen cracked on impact, but not before Adrian saw what was displayed there. It wasn't photographs of Ruby stealing. It was a text message thread between Victoria and someone named Detective Morrison, discussing how much it would cost to plant evidence and ensure an arrest went smoothly. Sergeant Martinez had seen it too. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Victoria's sharp intake of breath as she realized her final gambit had just destroyed her completely. But as Officer Thompson reached for his handcuffs, Adrian knew the real battle was just beginning. Victoria Cross wasn't going down quietly, and the war she was about to wage would test everything he thought he knew about justice, love, and the price of protecting the people who mattered most. The question that haunted him as steel clicked around Victoria's wrists was simple but terrifying. What else had she set in motion during her 2 years in his life? And how much damage would she do on her way down? "I can't believe what Victoria just tried to pull. The corruption goes even deeper than we thought. What do you think Detective Morrison's role is in all this?" Share your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Part 5 is going to reveal secrets that will change everything we thought we knew about this case. The handcuffs clicked around Victoria's wrists with a finality that echoed through the marble hallway like a death knell. But instead of the defeated collapse Adrian expected, Victoria threw back her head and laughed. A sound so cold and calculating it made everyone in the room take a step back. "You have no idea what you've just done," she said, her voice carrying a confidence that sent ice through Adrian's veins. "No idea at all." Sergeant Martinez tightened her grip on Victoria's arm. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent." "Oh, I'm not staying silent," Victoria interrupted, her green eyes fixed on Adrian with laser intensity. "Not when Adrian needs to know the truth about his precious Ruby." Ruby went rigid beside Adrian, her hand instinctively reaching for his arm. The contact sent warmth shooting through him, but Victoria's words froze it instantly. "What are you talking about?" Adrian demanded. Victoria's smile was pure poison. "Ask her about Chicago, Adrian. Ask her about the Morrison family. Ask her why she really came to New York 12 years ago." Officer Thompson moved closer, his hand resting on his radio. Detective Morrison wasn't just a corrupt cop. He was part of something bigger, something that had tentacles reaching back through Ruby's history. Ruby's face had gone ashen, but her voice remained steady. "I don't know what she's talking about." "Don't you?" Victoria's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Ruby Williams isn't even your real name, is it? Tell him about Rachel Morrison. Tell him about the accident that killed your first husband that wasn't really an accident at all." The words hit the room like grenades, exploding everything Adrian thought he knew about the woman standing beside him. Ruby's hand dropped from his arm as if she'd been burned. "That's not. I never." "The beautiful thing about having dirty cops in your network," Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength with each revelation, "is access to sealed records. Rachel Morrison was married to Detective Frank Morrison's brother. When Danny Morrison started asking too many questions about his police detective brother's gambling debts, he had a very convenient car accident. Adrian felt the floor shifting beneath his feet. Ruby, Rachel, had gone white as moonlight, her breathing shallow and rapid. The widow collected a nice insurance payout. Victoria pressed on, changed her name, moved to New York with her 3 children, and started working for wealthy families. Very wealthy, very trusting families. "Stop," Ruby whispered, but her voice carried no conviction, only crushing defeat. Sergeant Martinez looked between them, her professional composure cracking slightly. "Ma'am, is this true? Is Ruby Williams your legal name?" The silence stretched like a hell breath. Ruby's shoulders sagged as if the weight of 12 years of secrets had finally become too heavy to carry. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Rachel Morrison died in Chicago 12 years ago. Ruby Williams was born the day I got on a bus to New York with 3 children and $200 to my name." Adrian felt something break inside his chest. Not his heart, but his understanding of everything he believed about the woman who'd been the cornerstone of his adult life. Ruby, he said softly, is any of it true? Your husband's death, your struggle to raise your children, your work here, all of it. Her voice cracked like thin ice. Every single day of it. Danny's death, the poverty, the desperation, it was all real. The only thing that wasn't real was my name. Victoria's triumphant smile faltered slightly. But you didn't tell him about the insurance money, did you? About the $500,000 you collected when your husband died. Ruby's head snapped up, fire blazing in her dark eyes. Insurance money that went straight to Danny's medical bills and funeral costs. Insurance money that barely covered what we owed the hospital. I came to New York with nothing because there was nothing left. Then where's Detective Morrison's cut? Victoria pressed. Where's the money you've been skimming from Adrian all these years? There is no money. Ruby's voice finally broke, tears streaming down her face. There was never any money. I've sent every extra penny I could scrape together to my children, just like I told you. I've worn the same 3 uniforms for 5 years because I couldn't afford new ones. I've worked 16-hour days because I was grateful to have a job that let me send Maria to nursing school and pay for Tony's medical bills. Adrian stared at the woman he thought he knew, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. The exhaustion that never quite left her eyes. The way she wore her uniforms until they were threadbare. The careful way she portioned her own meals to make groceries stretch. The woman who'd refused every raise he'd offered, saying she was already paid more than fairly. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. About your real name, about Chicago. Ruby met his eyes, and in them he saw 12 years of fear, hope, and quiet desperation. Because I was terrified you'd send me away. Because Ruby Williams could work for the Stark family. But Rachel Morrison, a woman whose husband died under suspicious circumstances, would never be trusted around wealthy people again. The truth hit Adrian like lightning. Ruby hadn't been hiding from greed or criminal intent. She'd been hiding from a system that would never give a woman with her history a chance at redemption. Victoria sensed her narrative crumbling and played her final card. Tell him about the real reason Danny Morrison died. Ruby, tell him what Detective Morrison really wanted from you. Ruby's composure finally shattered completely. Danny found out Frank was taking bribes from the Torino crime family, she whispered. He was going to testify. Frank couldn't let that happen. Her voice broke. He killed his own brother and made it look like an accident. Officer Thompson's radio crackled to life. Dispatch calling his unit number with urgent priority. The coincidence sent chills through the room. Detective Morrison isn't just corrupt, Ruby continued, her voice gaining strength through her terror. He's been feeding information to organized crime for years. When Danny threatened to expose him, Frank eliminated the threat. I've been running from that truth for 12 years, terrified he'd find me and finish what he started. Adrian felt protective fury surge through him like molten steel. Ruby hadn't been a criminal hiding her past. She'd been a victim hiding from a killer. And now he has found you, Victoria said with satisfaction. Guess who I called before the police arrived? The blood drained from Adrian's face. What did you do? Victoria's smile was pure malice. Frank Morrison is on his way here. He's very interested in reuniting with his long-lost sister-in-law, especially now that she's found such a wealthy protector to hide behind. Sergeant Martinez was already reaching for a radio, but Victoria's laughter stopped her cold. Oh, and Adrian, Victoria's voice dripped venom. You should know that Frank Morrison isn't coming alone. The Torino family is very interested in a billionaire who's been asking too many questions about their business connections. Apparently, your Hartwell Industries merger threatens some of their money laundering operations. The room tilted as Adrian realized the full scope of what Victoria had orchestrated. This wasn't just about theft or even murder. It was about organized crime, corruption, and a web of violence that stretched back 12 years. Ruby grabbed his arm, her touch desperate and warm. Adrian, you have to get out of here. You have to run. Frank Morrison doesn't leave witnesses. But Adrian was done running, done being manipulated, done watching the woman he loved live in fear. He turned to Sergeant Martinez, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd built an empire through sheer determination. Officer, I need you to call the FBI. Right now. This is about to become a federal case. As Ruby stared at him with something that looked dangerously like love mixed with terror, Adrian made a choice that would define the rest of his life. He wasn't just going to protect Ruby Williams. He was going to help her reclaim Rachel Morrison's life and see justice done for her husband's murder. But first, they had to survive the next hour. Because 30 floors below, Detective Frank Morrison was getting out of an unmarked car, and he wasn't coming to make arrests. He was coming to clean up loose ends, once and for all. The corruption goes all the way to the top, and now organized crime is involved. Do you think Adrian and Ruby can survive what's coming? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed because part 6 is going to be absolutely intense. The elevator dinged 30 floors below with the sound of approaching doom. Sergeant Martinez's radio crackled with static, then went dead. Officer Thompson tried his backup device. Nothing but empty air. The building's cell towers, Adrian realized with growing horror, had been jammed. Professional-grade equipment, Victoria said with satisfaction, watching their faces as understanding dawned. Frank Morrison learned a lot about tactical operations during his 20 years on the force. Before he went into the private sector, of course. Ruby's hand found Adrian's, her fingers ice-cold and trembling. "They're going to kill us all," she whispered. "Frank doesn't leave witnesses. Ever." Adrian squeezed her hand, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see black SUVs surrounding the building's exits, their occupants too professionally positioned to be anything but military-trained. How many people are they willing to murder to keep this quiet? Sergeant Martinez demanded, her weapon drawn but useless against an army. Victoria's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "As many as it takes. You have no idea how deep this goes. The Torino family owns half the judges in this city, a quarter of the police force, and enough politicians to make your deaths look like a tragic home invasion gone wrong." Officer Thompson moved to the window, his face pale as he counted vehicles. "Sergeant, we need backup. Now." "Backup isn't coming," Victoria said cheerfully. Frank made sure the dispatch system received a cancellation of this call 20 minutes ago. As far as the NYPD knows, this was a false alarm. The sound of the elevator ascending filled the silence like a countdown to execution. Adrian's mind raced through options, each one more impossible than the last. The penthouse had no other exits. He designed it that way for security, never imagining security could become a trap. Ruby pulled away from him suddenly, her face transformed by desperate determination. "Adrian, there's something else I need to tell you." "Ruby, whatever it is." "My children," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "Maria, Tony, and Jasmine. They're not safe either. Frank Morrison has been watching them for weeks, waiting for the right moment." She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, showing him a text message that made his blood turn to ice water. "Unknown number. Tell Adrian Stark to back off the Hartwell merger, or your daughter Maria doesn't finish nursing school." "She doesn't finish anything." The message was time-stamped 3 hours ago, right around the time Adrian's plane had landed from Singapore. "They've been planning this since you announced the merger," Ruby whispered. "The Hartwell Industries launders money for the Torinos through their construction contracts. Your acquisition would expose everything." Adrian felt the walls closing in around them. This wasn't just about Victoria's greed or Frank Morrison's corruption. It was about a criminal empire worth hundreds of millions, and they were all expendable obstacles in its path. The elevator stopped. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Too many footsteps, moving with military precision. Sergeant Martinez positioned herself by the door, weapon raised. "Mr. Stark, is there another way out of here?" "The emergency stairs," Adrian said, "but they'll have those covered. The roof, helicopter pad, but they control air traffic," Victoria finished. Frank thought of everything. A new voice called through the door, male, authoritative, carrying the weight of practiced violence. "Adrian Stark, this is Detective Frank Morrison. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Ruby's entire body went rigid at the sound of her brother-in-law's voice. 12 years of running, 12 years of building a new life, and it all came down to this moment in a marble hallway with nowhere left to hide. "What does he want?" Officer Thompson whispered. "Rachel Morrison," Frank's voice continued. "It's time to come home. You've caused enough trouble." Adrian stepped protectively in front of Ruby, but she pushed past him toward the door with the courage of someone who'd finally stopped running. "Frank," she called out, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Let them go. This is between you and me. Oh, Rachel. Frank's voice carried false warmth that made everyone in the room shudder. This stopped being between just us the moment you decided to play house with a billionaire. Do you know how much money your boyfriend's merger is going to cost my associates? I don't know anything about his business dealings, Ruby replied. But you could. You've had access to his computers, his files, his private conversations for 12 years. You're what we call a security risk. Victoria smiled triumphantly from her position in handcuffs. I told him everything, Ruby. Every detail about your access, your routines, your weaknesses, including the heart condition you've been hiding. Ruby's hand went instinctively to her chest, and Adrian felt something break inside him as he realized the full scope of Victoria's betrayal. She hadn't just stolen his money and his trust. She'd mapped out every vulnerability of the woman he loved and delivered it to killers. Your medication, Adrian said suddenly, understanding flooding through him. That's why you work such long hours without breaks. That's why you sometimes sit down suddenly, why you get dizzy. Ruby nodded, defeat written across her beautiful face. Cardiomyopathy. I can't afford the surgery, so I manage it with pills when I can afford them, rest when I can't. The cruelty of it hit Adrian like a physical blow. Ruby had been slowly dying from a treatable condition because she couldn't afford health care, while he'd spent more on wine collections than her surgery would cost. The stress alone could kill her, Victoria added helpfully. Such a shame if she had an episode during questioning. Heart attacks are so common in women her age. Frank Morrison's voice came through the door again. Closer now. I'm going to count to 10, then we're coming in. Rachel comes with us quietly, and the rest of you might live to see morning. Otherwise, well, New York is a dangerous city. 1. Ruby turned to Adrian, her eyes full of love she'd never been able to speak. I need you to know, she whispered urgently, these 12 years with your family, they were the happiest of my life. Working for you, taking care of you, watching you become the man your mother hoped you'd be. It was an honor. 2. Ruby, don't. 3. I love you, she said simply, the words hitting him like lightning. I've loved you for years, but we could never. People like us don't get fairy tale endings. 4. Adrian grabbed her hands, pulling her close. People like us. 5. You're a billionaire, Adrian. I'm a maid with a fake name and a broken heart. Even if we survive this, what kind of future could we have? 6. Any future you want, Adrian said fiercely. Any future at all. 7. Ruby pulled away from him, moving toward the door with the resigned grace of someone walking to their execution. My children are more important than my heart. If I go with Frank, maybe he'll leave them alone. 8. Sergeant Martinez grabbed Ruby's arm. Ma'am, I can't let you surrender to killers. 9. Ruby looked back at Adrian one last time, memorizing his face. Tell my children I died, trying to protect them. Tell them I love them more than life itself. 10. The door exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood and marble dust. Frank Morrison filled the doorway like a nightmare made flesh, 6 feet of muscle and scar tissue, flanked by men in tactical gear who moved like death itself. His eyes found Ruby immediately, and his smile was the coldest thing Adrian had ever seen. Hello, sister, Frank said. Miss me? As Ruby was torn from Adrian's arms and dragged toward the hallway. As Sergeant Martinez fell unconscious from stun gun, as Officer Thompson's weapon was ripped from his hands, Adrian realized that all his money, all his power, all his influence meant nothing against men who killed for a living. The woman he loved was being taken from him, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. But as Frank Morrison's men forced Ruby toward the elevator, she looked back at Adrian one last time and mouthed 3 words that would either save them all or destroy what was left of his world. Trust Victoria's phone. The elevator doors closed on Ruby's terrified face, and Adrian Stark, billionaire, empire builder, and fool in love, was left alone with the shattered remains of his life and a riddle that might be their only hope. What had Ruby seen on Victoria's cracked phone that everyone else had missed? And why, in the darkest moment of her life, was she trusting him to solve a puzzle that could get them all killed? I can't believe Ruby just sacrificed herself to save everyone else. But what did she see on Victoria's phone? Drop your theories in the comments. I have a feeling it's going to change everything. Don't forget to subscribe, because part 7 is going to be absolutely explosive. The silence after the elevator doors closed was deafening, broken only by Sergeant Martinez's unconscious breathing and the distant hum of the city that suddenly felt a million miles away. Adrian stared at the cracked phone Victoria had dropped, Ruby's final words echoing in his mind like a prayer. Trust Victoria's phone. What did you see? He whispered to the empty air where Ruby had stood just moments before. Victoria, still in handcuffs but no longer triumphant, watched him with something that might have been fear creeping into her green eyes. Adrian, whatever you're thinking. Shut up. The words came out with such cold fury that Victoria actually flinched. Adrian picked up her phone, the cracked screen reflecting his face in jagged fragments. Ruby saw something on here. Something important enough to risk her life, giving me a clue. Officer Thompson, disarmed but still conscious, moved closer. Mr. Stark, we need a call for backup. With what? Adrian gestured at their dead radios, their jammed signals. Frank Morrison controls the entire grid around this building. We're on our own. He pressed the home button on Victoria's phone. The cracked screen flickered to life, and Adrian's heart nearly stopped. The text message thread with Detective Morrison was still open, but now Adrian could see the messages that had been cut off when the phone fell. Messages that changed everything. Victoria, package secured. Rachel Morrison neutralized, ready for the final phase. Detective Morrison, negative. Change of plans. Torino wants the girl alive for questioning. She may know about other Stark family assets. Victoria, what about Adrian? Detective Morrison, collateral damage. Make it look like a murder-suicide. Grieving billionaire kills Maid who betrayed him, then himself. Adrian's hand shook as he scrolled through more messages, each one more damning than the last. Victoria, what's my cut of the Hartwell money? Detective Morrison, 20% of laundering fees. Could be $50 million annually if Stark doesn't interfere. Victoria, and if he does interfere? Detective Morrison, then we eliminate the interference permanently. But it was the final message that made Adrian's blood turn to ice water. Detective Morrison, Torino has greenlit full family elimination. The Maid's children are already in custody. If Stark doesn't sign transfer documents for Hartwell Industries within the hour, everyone dies. The timestamp showed the message had been sent 15 minutes ago. Ruby's children. Adrian breathed, horror washing over him in waves. They have Ruby's children. Victoria's mask slipped completely, revealing something that might have been genuine remorse. Adrian, I never wanted it to go this far. I thought they just wanted the money. You thought wrong. Adrian's voice was deadly calm as he continued scrolling through the phone. You signed death warrants for an entire family because you couldn't stand that a maid had what you wanted. Officer Thompson peered over Adrian's shoulder at the screen. Mr. Stark, if we can get these messages to the FBI. The FBI is 45 minutes away on a good day, Adrian interrupted. Ruby's children don't have 45 minutes. But as he scrolled through Victoria's contacts, looking for anything that might help, Adrian found something that made hope flicker in his chest like a candle in the wind. A contact labeled insurance policy with a number he didn't recognize. He pressed the contact, and his breath caught. The information showed a name that changed everything. Agent Sarachin, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Victoria had been playing both sides. You were feeding information to the FBI, Adrian said, realizing dawning like sunrise after the longest night of his life. Victoria's composure cracked completely. I had to have an exit strategy. Frank Morrison is insane, and the Torinos, they don't let people retire peacefully. I needed protection. Adrian felt something that had been crushed inside his chest suddenly expand with possibility. What kind of information? Everything. Bank records, meeting locations, operational plans. I've been building a case against them for months. Officer Thompson's eyes widened. You're an informant? I'm a survivor, Victoria corrected. And right now, survival means Adrian Stark staying alive long enough to testify against the Torino crime family. Adrian stared at the woman he'd thought he loved, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the devoted girlfriend or the calculating villain, but something more complex. A woman who'd made terrible choices trying to claw her way out of a world that had never offered her real options. Why? He asked quietly. Why help me now? Victoria met his eyes, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked genuinely vulnerable. Because Frank Morrison just texted me the execution order for Ruby's children. 3 kids who never hurt anyone, who don't even know their mother's real name. Her voice broke. I may be a lot of things, Adrian, but I'm not a child killer. Hope bloomed in Adrian's chest like spring after endless winter. Agent Chun, can you reach her? Victoria nodded toward her phone. Speed dial 7. But Adrian, you need to understand, even if she can mobilize a response team, they're going to want something in return. What? You. As bait. Frank Morrison wants you alive long enough to sign over Hartwell Industries. That's our window. Adrian felt clarity settle over him like armor. For the first time since this nightmare began, he knew exactly what he had to do. He was going to trade himself for Ruby and her children. He was going to walk into the hands of killers with nothing but love and determination to protect him. And somehow, against all odds, he was going to save the woman who'd spent 12 years saving him. Officer Thompson grabbed his arm. Mr. Stark, you can't seriously be considering. I'm not considering anything, Adrian said, his voice steady as steel. I'm doing it. He dialed Agent Chen's number, and as the phone rang, he thought about Ruby's hands in his, the way she'd said his name, the 12 years of quiet devotion that had been more real than any passion he'd ever known. Agent Chun. A crisp voice answered on the second ring. This is Adrian Stark, he said. I believe Victoria Cross has been working with you on a case involving the Torino crime family and Detective Frank Morrison. Mr. Stark. Agent Chen's voice sharpened with interest. Where are you calling from? My penthouse, which is currently surrounded by men with guns who want to kill me and the woman I love. Sir, I need you to stay exactly where you are. We can have a tactical team. Agent Chun, Adrian interrupted. They have 3 children. Innocent kids whose only crime was having a mother brave enough to expose corruption. I'm not waiting for tactical teams. He looked at Victoria, at Officer Thompson, at the unconscious Sergeant Martinez, and made the choice that would define the rest of his life, however long that might be. I'm going to trade myself for those children and for Ruby Morrison. I'm going to walk into Frank Morrison's trap willingly. And when I do, I'm going to need you to be ready to catch every criminal involved in the biggest net you've ever cast. Agent Chen's voice carried new respect. Mr. Stark, what you're proposing is extremely dangerous. Adrian smiled, feeling more certain than he'd been about anything in his entire life. Agent Chun, I built a $3 billion empire by taking calculated risks. This isn't even close to the most dangerous gamble I've ever made. As he hung up the phone and began planning the rescue that would either save them all or destroy him completely, Adrian felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Absolute clarity about what mattered most. Ruby Williams had spent 12 years protecting his family. Now, it was his turn to protect hers. Adrian's about to walk into the most dangerous situation of his life, and I have chills. Do you think his plan will work? What role do you think Victoria will play in the final showdown? Let me know in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed because Part 8 is going to be absolutely epic. Adrian Stark walked into the abandoned warehouse on Pier 47 with nothing but a briefcase full of signed documents and a heart full of desperate love. The Hudson River stretched out behind the building like a black mirror, reflecting the city lights that suddenly felt as distant as stars. Frank Morrison had chosen the location well, isolated, soundproof, with multiple escape routes that led directly to international waters. But Adrian wasn't thinking about escape routes as he stepped through the rusted metal door. He was thinking about Ruby's face when she'd told him she loved him, about 3 children who were probably terrified and alone, about 12 years of quiet devotion that deserved better than a violent end in a forgotten corner of New York. Right on time, Frank Morrison's voice echoed through the cavernous space. I appreciate punctuality in my business associates. Adrian's eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, revealing a scene that made his blood run cold. Ruby sat bound to a chair in the center of the warehouse, her face bruised but her eyes blazing with unbroken defiance. 30 feet away, 3 younger figures huddled together on the concrete floor. Maria, 22 and fierce like her mother. Tony, 19 with his leg brace glinting in the harsh overhead light. And Jasmine, just 16 with her mother's intelligent dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Let them go, Adrian said, his voice carrying the authority that had built empires. The documents you wanted are in this briefcase. Hartwell Industries, signed over to a shell company controlled by the Torino family. You got what you came for. Frank Morrison stepped into the light, and Adrian got his first clear look at the man who'd terrorized Ruby for 12 years. He was smaller than Adrian had expected, maybe 5'10", graying at the temples, with the soft build of someone who'd spent more time behind a desk than in the field. But his eyes held the cold calculation of a man who'd killed his own brother without losing sleep. "Oh, Adrian," Frank said with false warmth. "You really think this is just about money? About some construction contracts and laundering operations?" Ruby's voice cut through the warehouse like a blade. "Tell him the truth, Frank. Tell him what this is really about." Frank's smile turned predatory. Smart girl. Always too smart for her own good. He circled Adrian like a shark scenting blood. "This isn't about Hartwell Industries, Mr. Stark. It's about your mother." The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. "My mother, Eleanor Stark, was a very curious woman," Frank continued. "Very interested in children's charities, very dedicated to investigating where donation money actually went. She became particularly interested in St. Catherine's Home for Children about 6 months before her death." Adrian felt the world tilt beneath his feet. His mother had died of a heart attack, sudden, unexpected, but medically verified by 3 different doctors. St. Catherine's was a front, Ruby said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of 12 years of hidden knowledge. The Torino family was trafficking children through fake adoption agencies. Your mother found out. Frank's laugh was as sharp as breaking glass. Eleanor Stark was going to expose everything. Cost us millions in revenue. Destroy a network we'd spent decades building. He pulled out a small vial from his jacket pocket. Amazing what a little potassium chloride can do to someone's heart rhythm. Completely undetectable in autopsy, if administered correctly. You killed my mother, Adrian said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. I killed a problem, Frank corrected. Just like I'm about to kill another one. But as Frank Morrison prepared to deliver his final monologue, Adrian heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the distant whisper of helicopter rotors approaching fast across the water. You know what's interesting about the FBI, Frank? Adrian said, loud enough to mask the growing sound of approaching cavalry. They really don't like it when people murder federal witnesses. Frank's confident smile faltered. What are you talking about? Ruby's voice rose above the growing noise of rotors and engines. He's talking about the wire I've been wearing for the past hour, Frank. The one Agent Sean gave me when your men were stupid enough to let me use the bathroom at the safe house. The warehouse erupted into chaos. FBI tactical teams poured through every entrance simultaneously. Windows, doors, skylights that Adrian hadn't even known existed. Red laser dots danced across Frank Morrison's chest as Agent Sarah Chin's voice boomed through a megaphone. FBI. Nobody move. But Frank Morrison wasn't going quietly. He pulled a gun from his jacket with desperate speed, swinging it toward Ruby's head. I'll kill her. I'll kill them all. Adrian moved without thinking, without planning, driven by pure protective instinct. He launched himself across the 30 feet separating him from Ruby's chair, knowing he'd never make it in time, knowing he was probably about to die, but unable to do anything else. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse like thunder. Adrian hit the concrete floor hard, rolling, expecting to feel the burning pain of a bullet wound. Instead, he heard Frank Morrison scream, a sound of pure agony that meant someone else had taken the shot. Victoria Cross stood in the warehouse doorway, smoking gun in her hands, her face pale but determined. FBI training includes marksmanship, she said quietly. I never mentioned that part. Frank Morrison clutched his shattered gun hand, his weapon spinning across the concrete as tactical officers swarmed him. Adrian reached Ruby's chair and began cutting through her restraints with hands that shook like leaves. Are you hurt? Are you okay? I'm fine, Ruby whispered, but her voice broke as she said it. My children. Safe, Agent Chin announced, approaching with Maria, Tony, and Jasmine in tow. We intercepted them before they ever reached this location. Your kids have been in protective custody for the past 2 hours. Ruby dissolved into tears as her children surrounded her, their arms wrapping around their mother, and Adrian in a tangle of relief and love that felt more valuable than any empire he'd ever built. Ow! Adrian asked Agent Shun over the chaos of arrests and evidence collection. Victoria Cross has been feeding us intelligence for 8 months, Agent Shun explained. When we learned about the threat to you and the Morrison family, we set up this entire operation. The warehouse, the isolation, even Frank Morrison's confidence. All of it was designed to get him to confess to crimes we could never have proven otherwise. Adrian looked across the warehouse to where Victoria sat in FBI custody, no longer the calculating villain or the desperate victim, but something more complex, a woman who'd made terrible choices and then chosen to make one final, crucial decision for good. Their eyes met across the distance, and Victoria nodded once. Not an apology, because what she'd done was unforgivable, but acknowledgement that in the end, she'd chosen to be better than her worst impulses. Will she? Adrian began. Witness protection, reduced sentence, new identity, Agent Shin said. She'll testify against the entire Torino organization. Thanks to her cooperation and your bravery, we're going to dismantle a network that's been operating for 20 years. Ruby's hand found Adrian's, their fingers intertwining as FBI agents led Frank Morrison past them in handcuffs. The man who'd killed his mother, who'd terrorized Ruby for 12 years, who'd threatened innocent children, looked smaller somehow. Not a monster, just a broken man who'd chosen violence over honor. Ruby, Adrian said quietly as the warehouse around them transformed from a nightmare into a crime scene. There's something I need to tell you. She looked up at him, her face still bearing the marks of what she'd endured, but her eyes bright with hope and love and the possibility of finally being safe. I don't care what your real name is, he said. I don't care about Chicago or Detective Morrison or anything that happened before you walked into my life 12 years ago. You could be Rachel Morrison or Ruby Williams or anyone else in the world, and I would still love you exactly as much as I do right now. Ruby's smile was radiant as sunrise after the longest night. Adrian Stark, she said, are you proposing to help? He kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of promises for a future neither of them had dared to imagine just hours before. I'm proposing to the woman who saved my life in every way that matters. Around them, the warehouse buzzed with activity, evidence being collected, statements being taken, a criminal empire being systematically dismantled. But in the circle of Ruby's arms, surrounded by her children who were already calling him Uncle Adrian, he felt something he'd never experienced in 32 years of wealth and power. He felt home. I'm literally crying. The way this all came together is absolutely perfect. But wait, there's still one more part to go. What do you think happens next in the conclusion? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe because part 9 is going to wrap this incredible story up with the most beautiful ending. 6 months later, Ruby Williams, legally Rachel Morrison Stark as of 3 weeks ago, stood in the kitchen of the penthouse she now called home, watching her husband attempt to make pancakes for their combined family Sunday breakfast. Adrian, she said gently, trying not to laugh as he struggled with the spatula, you're a billionaire. You could hire someone to do this. I could, Adrian agreed, carefully flipping what might generously be called a pancake, but then I'd miss watching you try not to laugh at my complete lack of domestic skills. From the dining room came the sound of Maria explaining cardiac procedures to an fascinated Tony, while Jasmine practiced her valedictorian speech for the private school Adrian had quietly enrolled her in, not as charity, but as family investment in the brilliant mind that reminded him so much of his mother. The transformation of their lives hadn't happened overnight. It had taken months of therapy, legal proceedings, and careful rebuilding of trust that had been shattered by violence and deception. But watching Adrian, who'd conquered boardrooms and built empires, struggle with breakfast food while wearing an apron that read, "World's Best Stepdad," felt like the most natural thing in the world. How's your heart today? Adrian asked, the question that had become his daily ritual since Ruby's surgery 2 months ago. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the steady, strong rhythm that modern medicine and Adrian's resources had given back to her. Perfect, she said, meaning it in every possible way. The surgery had been performed by the best cardiac team in the country. The recovery had taken place in a private room, filled with flowers from well-wishers who'd followed their story in the media. But the real healing had happened in quiet moments like this one. Adrian learning to cook, Ruby learning to let herself be loved, both of them learning that fairy tales could come true even after the darkest chapters. "Any word from Agent Sean about the trial?" Ruby asked, settling into Adrian's arms as they waited for the pancakes to finish cooking. "Jury deliberation started yesterday," Adrian replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Frank Morrison's looking at life without parole for my mother's murder, your husband's death, and the trafficking charges. The entire Torino organization is being dismantled piece by piece." Ruby nodded, feeling the weight of 12 years of fear finally lifting completely. Danny Morrison would have justice at last. The children who'd been trafficked through St. Catherine's home would get the support and counseling they needed. And Frank Morrison would never hurt another family again. And Victoria? Adrian's arms tightened around her slightly. Witness protection in Oregon. New identity. Supervised release. Agent Sean says she's working as a bookkeeper for a small nonprofit that helps domestic violence survivors. Apparently, she's quite good at it. Ruby felt a complex mix of emotions when she thought about Victoria Cross. The woman had caused immeasurable pain, had orchestrated betrayals that could have destroyed everything. But in the end, she'd chosen redemption over revenge, courage over cowardice. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it offered hope that people could change when given the chance. "Do you think about her?" Ruby asked quietly. Adrian considered the question seriously, the way he approached everything important in their life together. "I think about who I thought she was, and I'm grateful that person was never real. Because if she had been, I might never have seen what was right in front of me all along." Ruby tilted her head back to look at him. This man who'd given up everything to save her family, who'd learned to love not just her, but her children with the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd found his true calling. "What was right in front of you?" Adrian's smile was soft as morning light. "Home. Love. A woman who spent 12 years taking care of my heart before I was smart enough to give it to her." Maria appeared in the kitchen doorway, her nursing school graduation photos still scattered across the dining table where they'd been planning her celebration party. "Uncle Adrian," she said. She'd never been able to call him Dad, but Uncle Adrian held its own special meaning. "The pancakes are smoking." Adrian and Ruby broke apart, laughing as they rescued breakfast from his well-intentioned but disastrous cooking attempt. Within minutes, the kitchen was filled with the controlled chaos of family. Tony arguing with Jasmine about college choices, Maria telling stories from her hospital internship, Ruby supervising while Adrian started over with fresh batter. "Mrs. Morrison Stark," Jasmine said formally, practicing the speech rhythm she'd been working on, "do you think it's weird that I want to study criminal justice because of what happened to us?" Ruby met her youngest daughter's eyes, seeing the strength and determination that had carried her through trauma into purpose. "I think," Ruby said carefully, "that surviving something terrible and deciding to help other people survive it too is the most beautiful form of healing I've ever seen." Adrian squeezed Ruby's hand, and she knew he was thinking the same thing. How proud Danny Morrison would be of the children he'd never lived to see grow into these remarkable young adults. "Besides," Tony added with a grin, "someone has to keep Uncle Adrian from accidentally funding any more criminal enterprises." "That was one time," Adrian protested, "and technically, I was the victim of the criminal enterprise, not the founder." "Details," Maria said dismissively, but her smile was warm with affection. Ruby watched her family, biological and chosen, gather around the breakfast table in the home that had transformed from a workplace into a sanctuary, and felt the kind of contentment that money couldn't buy, but love could create. Later, as they sat on the terrace overlooking the city, watching the Sunday afternoon light paint the skyline in shades of gold and amber, Adrian pulled out a small velvet box that made Ruby's breath catch. "We're already married," she pointed out. "This isn't a proposal," Adrian said, opening the box to reveal not a ring, but a small golden locket. "It's a promise." Inside the locket were two photos, one of Ruby's children, one of Adrian's mother. Family past and family future, bound together in a piece of jewelry that sparkled with more value than its materials. "A promise of what?" Ruby asked, as Adrian fastened the chain around her neck. "That family isn't about blood or money or names on legal documents," Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's about choosing to love someone every day, choosing to protect them, choosing to build something beautiful together, even when the world tries to tear it apart. Ruby touched the locket, feeling the weight of love and loss and hope combined. Adrian Stark, she said, do you know what you've given me? What? Everything I never dared to dream I deserved. They sat in comfortable silence as the city sparkled below them. Two people who'd found their way to each other through pain and betrayal, and the kind of love that transformed everything it touched. From inside the penthouse came the sound of her children arguing over movie choices, planning their futures, living the safe, stable, love-filled lives that Ruby had worked 16-hour days to provide and that Adrian's resources had finally made possible. Ruby, Adrian said as the sun began to set over Manhattan, do you think we get happy endings in real life? Ruby smiled, thinking of Frank Morrison in prison, of Victoria finding purpose and helping others, of her children thriving, of her own heart beating strong and steady in her chest, of the man beside her who'd proven that some fairy tales were worth believing in. I think, she said, we get what we're brave enough to fight for. And as the lights of the city began to twinkle like earthbound stars, Ruby Williams Morrison Stark knew that their fight had been worth every moment of fear, every tear, every desperate gamble on love. Because in the end, they'd won everything that mattered. They'd won against each other. What an incredible journey this has been. From betrayal and corruption to justice and true love. This story proves that sometimes the most beautiful endings come after the darkest chapters. I hope Ruby and Adrian's story touched your heart as much as it touched mine. What was your favorite moment in this emotional roller coaster? Was it when Ruby finally stood up for herself? When Adrian chose love over safety? Or when Victoria found her redemption? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing from you. And if this story keeps you on the edge of your seat, make sure you're subscribed to my channel because I have so many more incredible stories coming that will take you on emotional journeys you'll never forget. Until next time, remember, love always wins, and everyone deserves their fairy tale ending. Thank you for being part of this beautiful story with me.